Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. We are reading the Bible. We are reading the New Testament, the Gospel according to St. Mark, in the King James Version. And we are up to chapter 11. And our character, Jesus, and his disciples are going to Jerusalem, where Jesus has now repeatedly prophesied, told his disciples that he will be arrested, scourged, spat upon, humiliated, killed, and then he will rise again on the third day. So this is a fateful journey that they're taking. And I think you're going to notice that Mark is concentrating more and more on that. So let's get to, we're now at chapter 11. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem, unto Bethphage and Bethany, and the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth two of his disciples, and saith unto them, Go your way into the village over against you, and as soon as ye entered into it, ye shall find a colt tied, whereon never man sat. Loose him, and bring him. And if any man say unto you, Why do ye this? Say ye that the Lord hath need of him, and straightway he will send him hither. And they went their way, and found the colt tied by the door without, in a place there where two ways met, and they loose him. And certain of them that stood there said unto them, Why do ye, loosening the colt? And they said unto them, even as Jesus had commanded, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus, and cast their garments on him, and he sat upon him. And many spread their garments in the way, in other words, in the road, and others cut down branches off the trees, and strawed them in the way. And they went that way before, and they went that followed, cried, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David, that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And Jesus entered into Jerusalem, and into the temple, and when he had looked round about upon all things, and now the eventide was come, he went out unto Bethany with the 12. You notice once again here the very human origins of this gospel. Jesus is a supernatural being. He has now communed and been transfigured with Moses and Elijah. He has healed innumerable people, caused withered hands to grow back, caused dead people to come alive, caused sight to return to the blind. But he does not create a cult. He doesn't do that. Instead, he tells the disciples where they can go and find one and steal it from its owner. He doesn't just make one. Because that would not, I think it's safe to say, that would not be anything that anyone had ever seen. Whereas you don't know what you see. If a woman in the crowd says, I was healed just by touching the hem of his garment, you don't know that. You don't. If someone is begging and claims to be blind, you don't know that he was blind. We saw Bartimaeus just in the last chapter who wanted Jesus to restore his sight. How does Bartimaeus get Jesus' attention? By climbing a tree. Is that something blind people do? You don't know any of that. But one thing, if these Gospels originated in actual eyewitness testimony of an actual supernatural thing, well, you won't get an account where Jesus makes a donkey or a colt. You won't get that. You get this instead. But you also get something else, very important here. Gone from this gospel is any hint on Jesus' part of trying to hide what's going on, right? We've seen that in the whole course of the gospel. He heals somebody and no sooner finishes making them whole again than he says, don't tell anyone. They often do, but he doesn't want them to. Here, he's allowing himself to make what amounts to a religious procession into Jerusalem with a crowd. And it gets worse, much worse, unbelievably worse, unfortunately. But let's go on here. And on the morrow, so the next day, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. So he goes to a fig tree that's not in season, mistakenly thinking that it might be bearing fruit, and he's wrong. And Jesus answered and saith unto it, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. There's a note that's lodged in there. The disciples heard him say that. And they come to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. It was a very lucrative practice. It took up a huge amount of space in the great temple of Jerusalem. A huge amount of space was devoted to selling religious trinkets, selling sacrifice animals that you would then bring into the temple. I don't know. I don't want to hammer on this too much, but Jerusalem was not a free city. It was garrisoned by Romans and also had extremely powerful moneyed interests of its own, which Jesus has been running into in the whole course of this gospel. It's let's just say it's extremely unlikely that somebody could just walk in off the street and start disrupting that commerce, overturning tables and stuff like that. That's extremely unlikely. That is more than likely an event put in behind the scenes, put in after the fact. And would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught, saying unto them, Is it not written, My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer? But have ye made it into a den of thieves? And the scribes and chief priests heard it, and sought how they might destroy him. For they feared him, because all the people was astonished at his doctrine. And when even was come, he went out of the city. I know we're not reading these things as historical documents, but if he had gone into the temple and prevented people from carrying vessels of oil or any incense or anything like that, overturned tables of money changers, destroyed the business in the forecourt of the temple, he would not be leaving. He would not be just going back to Bethany to spend the night. But we're not reading it as a historical document. This is meant to express outrage. It's a very effective expression of the fact that Jesus is something new. Because this isn't happening in some corrupt suburb of the empire. This is happening in the temple, the center of Jewish life, of Jewish religious life. The great temple in Jerusalem. He's going there and finding that it is debased. And that is meant to underscore that this is a new thing. This is the word alive. And it's not happy with what it's seeing. Far more direct unhappiness than most of the Old Testament prophets. But let's just move on here without more Steve interruptions here. And in the morning, as they passed by, they saw a fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, calling to remembrance, saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursest is withered away. And Jesus answering saith unto them, Have faith in God. For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. And when ye stand praying, forgive, and if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive you your trespasses. And they came again into Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, there came to him the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and say unto him, By what authority dost thou do these things? And who gaveth thee this authority to do these things? And Jesus answered and said unto them, I will ask of you one question, and answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or of men? Answer me. And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If we shall say from heaven, he will say, Why then did you not believe him? But if we shall say of men, they feared that the people, for all the men counted John, and when that he was a prophet indeed. So John is remembered and revered. They don't want to say that he was just making things up. They don't want to say they didn't have divine authority because they're surrounded by former followers of his. And they answered and said unto Jesus, We cannot tell. And Jesus answering saith unto them, Neither do I tell you by what authority I do these things. And that is the end of chapter 11. Fairly maddening in a couple of ways. Jesus should tell them. He should not only tell them what authority he does these things, he should show them. What does it matter to him what they think about John? It shouldn't matter to him at all. They are the people with the most authority over the populace. He should show them his authority. Instead, we have this very human narrative of human opposition. There is a firebrand preacher, and there is the chief priests and elders of the temple who want to destroy him. We have a very human drama that is coming to a head, obviously. Obviously, it's coming to a head. Jesus and his disciples have entered into Jerusalem, and he will never leave it alive. So that story is coming to a climax, and that's the story that the writer of this gospel wants to tell. It doesn't fit with the story of a celestial being that wants an all-important word with a capital W to be distributed amongst the populace. It doesn't fit with that. Why would you antagonize these chief priests? Why would you do that? Because they're evil? Because they're whited sepulchres, as we're going to hear? Well, can't you change that? You said yourself you came for the sick and not for the healthy. It seems to me that if in that reading, these would be the sickest people of all. Why can't you help them? Instead of quizzing them about John the Baptist. Why would you do that? But far more important here, I mentioned in an earlier discussion of a chapter, that Jesus makes a whole bunch of claims, right? He makes factual claims, like the mustard seed being the smallest seed, or in this particular chapter, he simply gets wrong that a fig tree will have figs on it. Unless you go out of your way to interpret it liturgically or according to Judaic law or Judaic tradition or anything like that. But if we're just reading it as a text and not doing any kind of exegesis, if we're just reading it as a text, what's conveyed here is that this country bumpkin, the son of a provincial carpenter, not a farmer in other words, not a tiller of the field at all, is mistaken. He is hungry. He thinks he might find figs on a fig tree, and there aren't any figs on the fig tree, so he curses it. Now, this country bumpkin has supernatural powers, so he can wither it. But he's still wrong. So we mentioned that he gets historical figures wrong. He gets historical resonances wrong. Even the resonance here that the gospel writers put in about finding a virgin, a colt that's never been ridden before by a man, is at least sideways a wrong callback to an Old Testament verse that we don't need to get into. But he makes factual errors. He makes historical errors. But more importantly, he also makes supernatural errors. This is the biggest one that he's ever claimed, which is that if a believer of his has no doubt in his heart at all about what he's professing, his faith can literally move mountains, not metaphorically. That it can literally do anything that believer wants. And that is not true. That is, unless you're saying that no one has ever been an honestly believing Christian, which would be a pretty poor track record for a supernatural being if you say that's never, ever happened. I don't know about you, but I've known Christians who absolutely did believe. There was not a single particle of falsity in them. They absolutely did believe. And their belief was definitely able to make them move metaphorical mountains. Gave them endurance in the face of life's hardship and life's injustices that I don't know. They claimed that they would not have had that endurance without their faith. I can't help but take them at their word. But literal mountains? Jesus is talking about literal mountains here. If you have been a fervent Christian your whole life and at the age of 35 you are taken by the state forces of Tudor England and you are chained to a post in the middle of your city and set on fire, your prayers in that moment are not going to have any doubt in them. The prayers that brought you to that moment are not going to have any doubt in them. And you'll still die. No Christian has ever moved a mountain with their faith. Honest or otherwise. No Christian has ever done that. So this is a supernatural claim that this supernatural being, obviously he's a supernatural being if he can wither fig trees. This is a supernatural claim that this supernatural figure is making that is wrong. So we just have to work that into our appreciation of Mark as the earliest gospel, that this is still a raw work. This is still a very human character, right? That line, the disciples heard it. Presumably the disciples have heard everything that's been reported in this gospel, but we haven't heard that line until now. When he says, he curses a fig tree, he says, since you didn't feed me, you're never going to feed anyone. That's very interesting, I think. Those raw, personal, human elements are very interesting. And that's where we're going to end this chapter for today. The plot line that I was talking about, such as it is, the Gospels aren't really novels, so they don't really have plots. But the plot line that we've pointed out a couple of times now has now reached a boiling point, an absolute boiling point. Because Jesus isn't out in the provinces anymore. He's in Jerusalem, in the temple, disrupting the trade of the temple and upbraiding the chief priests and scribes that are there, saying, I'm not even going to go so far as to tell you what my authority is. When you think about that, that's not a big thing. That's not a big request on their part. They've made bigger requests in this gospel. Now they only want to know, you're drawing all these crowds, you're saying all these things. Why? What authority do you have? They're not saying necessarily, probably they would, they're the bad guys after all, but they're not saying necessarily that they would reject that authority. They just want to know what it is, and Jesus won't tell them. In addition to the disruption of the temple's money laundering, he also won't talk to them in any way. So the writer of the gospel is definitely setting up a dark conclusion. I think it's safe to say now that we're in Jerusalem that we are on the downward slope to that dark conclusion. So we will go on to the next chapter next time. And I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.